It was a bit grand. It was
a bit grand, a bit verbose,
which is very fitting, I suppose,
Yeah,
to our topic of conversation.
Yeah. I don't know what a level of apocalypticism.
Yeah. I wonder how much apocalypticism is should be allowed.
Yeah. It's warranted. I mean, in some ways, it made me feel better.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah. I mean, it made me feel terrified as well. But
Yeah.
Hey,
you know what, man? It's gonna happen. It's all gonna happen. What are you gonna do? I forget where I read this.
Hide in my little corner of the world, and
yeah, exactly.
Hope for the best.
Just let me get a job before the economy crashes. Yeah. That's all I want. Before Trump destroys Europe, just let me get a job. Squirrel some money away. And I'll squirrel some beans away. Well, here we are. The spring edition of Auxiliary Statements, Dan. Look at us. My first seed came up today. I don't know what I'm going to do with any of these seeds, but we got seeds. I have a sunflower seed that came up.
Not got any souls at the minute at all. You'll have to just do some kind of guerrilla gardening campaign, go and find bits of scrubland or something, or start a little community garden on the green outside or something.
Yeah, they're like, who's planting these broad beans in the medium strip of the highway?
Yeah.
I'm like, it's fixing nitrogen. Yeah, we got to figure out the Irish allotment scene. We got to figure that out. I'll get there. We'll sort it all out. I've got plans.
Yeah. Somebody let us know.
So yeah. Hey,
how does
listeners, in the comments below, let us know. I have a question for you, Dan, and this might actually just start our conversation off. This is something that I've been thinking about, and it was a special. Well, okay, hang on. Sorry. Before we mainly read an article by Critisticuffs for today about Trump. We read a few other things about Trump because we wanted to do a once every 6 months we talk about current events episode of Auxiliary Statements. So we're talking a little bit about Trump. You can just find the links to what we read, I guess, in the description or whatever. But in one of the essays that we read, there was a brief touching upon the idea of Trump not being stupid, and everybody who thinks that Trump is stupid, well, you all look foolish now because he's actually quite astute when it comes to navigating the public sphere, and he's quite mercurial in his intelligence. And I wanted to run that past you to see what you think about that, because that idea to me is a bit laughable. But also, I feel like we can probably hold in our minds two things. One of which is that Trump is one of yeah, we'll see. One of them, which is that Trump is maybe the stupidest person the world has ever seen, just mind-numbingly stupid. But also that there is a very if not coherent plan, there's a air quotes rational a rational plan of some sort, I suppose, that makes sense given the laws of capitalism and the laws of our society and American imperialism, that kind of gives weight to what Trump is doing, what the Trump administration is trying to do in terms of its imperialist goals and its economic plans and all of these things. That there is very clearly a direction there that they're trying to go. But I feel like maybe we've bent the stick a little bit too far from 2016, where it's oh, we all look foolish now. Trump was a genius. He's a genius. Steve Bannon, a genius. It's I don't know. I was reading those text messages that they sent with the Atlantic journalist in them, and it's these people are just so stupid. I don't know.
It's funny, isn't it? Because even in 2016, there were certain people promoting a narrative which said there's a certain consistency to what Trump's been saying for 100 years, for 20 years or something. And now I suppose consistency doesn't necessarily mean intelligence, right? But I think you're right that I don't know, what I did enjoy about these essays was that a certain element of there is a coherence, there is a way of comprehending what's going on, there's a way of articulating and understanding Trump's and the sort of broader conservative MAGA project now, sort of that's the central policy of the US government. A way of conceiving that in terms that aren't just this is mad, this is crazy, because I mean, I've admitted before, and I feel like I'll continue to admit, that like there's part of me that sort of like always leans toward the most liberal interpretation of anything. There's still a part of me that like, and I encounter it from other people, and a sort of broad narrative you could approach this with is like Trump tearing up the sort of liberal world order that's like protected us from the prospect of another global war ever since the end of World War II. And one of the things that one of these essays challenges quite heavily is the idea that like, makes clear is that that world order was the result of a self-interested economic project led by the US, rather than, I suppose, being some kind of like liberal moralistic implement the correct system that ensures world peace and puts in place the right laws and norms and
The end of history.
traditions of civility, and
Yeah.
like but it's nice to get a rational, like a rational seeming explanation of the sort of like policies coming out of the US, both sort of like internal to the US and also as regards the US government's approach to global affairs, that isn't just a sort of like, or doesn't, sort of runs counter to a liberal hand wringing of, oh my God, somebody think of the children. Why, why send us down this track? Now, and that isn't a direct answer to your question. Like, clearly Trump isn't a secret genius, but I suppose it's possible for him to be either intuitively aware of a certain set of economic interests. I mean, clearly he has his own economic interests. He comes from an economic class. He comes from a sort of like I mean, he has people around him, presumably throughout his life, that have sort of like influenced him to have opinions. And obviously, like, there is a more coherent thought collective, I suppose, set of institutions, a set of thinkers around him now that are able to sort of coalesce a more coherent attitude, I suppose. So, like, maybe there's something rational about what's happening that doesn't necessarily need to be explained by him having some kind of higher 10th dimensional chess intelligence approach to what's going on.
Yeah, I mean, listen, he's just acting as a representative of a specific faction of capital. If it wasn't him, it would be somebody else. Obviously, his own personal, like, you know, nuances, shall we say, will come into affecting the course of history because he has certainly an outweighed level of importance, but he's also like clearly symptomatic, clearly representative of certain interests. One thing I will say about that though is because that's just how I've always kind of thought about him and like every politician is, again, like I was reading this, we're recording this like a week early, so by the time this comes out, everyone I'm sure will have already forgotten about this. But like as of today, the Atlantic just published screenshots of the like group chat that they accidentally added the editor of the Atlantic to, where they're talking about like bombing Yemen, right? And it's just like the most horrific thing you've ever seen, but it's grimly very, very funny. JD Vance is so stupid. It's so funny. But it also surprised me that it was like, here are these people, national security advisors, CIA advisors, military guys, the vice president, all just being like, oh, here's what we should do. We should do this. Should we do that? Just chatting in like a group text, right? About like, global like policy and war. And it did kind of just seem to hinge in some points on like, I don't know, just ask Trump what he thinks. Maybe we'll do it, maybe we won't, because the last word is his. I was a bit surprised by that, because I think maybe part of my liberal brain is just like, Trump's off at the golf course, he doesn't care. But it's like, clearly they do still have to run some things by him, you know what I mean? Like, as
Yeah.
grim as that is.
I mean, I hadn't read those. Like, yeah, that's an interesting insight to the working of this administration,
It's
I guess. But
horrible. It's horrible. It's so horrible. That's how things work. What are you
yeah,
gonna do?
yeah. But I guess it leaves. I mean, like, there is a certain. I guess to some extent there was a certain fatalism in some of these pieces, whereby it makes it seem like there's a master plan, and maybe the sort of like going to Trump is to just like that's the sort of the wheel of fortune moment where you just like, we don't know what to do. Let's just work out a random thing to do.
Yeah, actually.
We
Yeah.
don't. We maybe Trump's incoherence is actually just something for like policymakers to hide behind. Because like otherwise they just have to pretend that they had a good reason for doing something. But
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, listen, they're acting within a given set of parameters. Sometimes those actions are going to be insane, but it's just like, man, if you just give like five of the world's stupidest people access to like the world's biggest bombs, it's like, uh, it's just like, oh my God.
Mhm, mhm.
Very
And
grim.
yeah, given a willingness to act. I mean, that's the terrifying thing, right? Like,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
um,
Mm. Which America has never been short of, Trump or no
oh
Trump.
yeah, I guess,
You know
yeah,
what I mean?
yeah.
Um, all right. Well, maybe we get into actually talking about some of the things that we read. So the main thing, like I said, is this new Critisticuffs piece, which is really, really good. It's kind of like I love the way the Critisticuff stuff is written because a lot of it is it's very geared for like going to fairs, going to book fairs, going to zine fairs, they give all their shit out for free, right? You can get all their PDFs online, and so they're just all written in a really, really clear style, in a really, really like this is going to make me sound like an idiot, but like short sentences, like short paragraphs, like you could kind of give a lot of their pieces, and a lot of the stuff they talk about is like value theory. They didn't talk about it in this one, but like you could give a lot of their stuff to just like some schmuck and they would understand it. I think that's really, really to their credit. And so the piece that we read, which just came out, is called Peace for Our Time. And it's like half a kind of quick crash course on capitalist states and kind of like something approaching like a theory of the state in a way that like imperialism operates, and then kind of like applying that to Trump, um, to kind of understand this change, which is going to, I think, kind of be like the main thing we talk about today, which is like this change in um, America's orientation re like imperialism, like its new imperialist stance, kind of like the tearing up of the global or the post World War II global order, what that actually means, why they're doing it, um, and it's all very, very good. I mean, like we read some other stuff from the Weekly Worker, and they all seem to more or less be pretty much in agreement about who Trump is and what he represents, which is really interesting because it's like this clarity it definitely wasn't there in 2016, and it probably wasn't really there for Trump's administration either. You know what I mean? Like there were certainly some things that they wanted to do going into that first term that Trump had. A lot of things that they actually did in terms of like telegraphing what their new economic and imperialist project was going to be, kind of like economic growth at the expense of Europe, kind of maybe trying to like sow some discord within the EU, things like that. And a lot of those things were actually kind of like continued through Biden's administration in terms of like economic protectionism for like manufacturing in the United States, things like that. But now everybody does, even though we're only like, it's like been a very short time since Trump has taken office. A lot of leftists do seem to be like, oh, wow, this is much more organized. This is much more serious. Trump has come into the administration with a like, they know what they want to do, and they're hoping that this time they're going to be able to do a lot of those plans, economic protectionism, like just outright, changing of America's borders. We'll see how that winds up going. But it is worrying, and it is interesting to see like pieces like this being written about like here's what they were trying to do in 2016, but now it seems like they kind of have the mandate to just do a lot of these things. A lot of that kind of seems to be because um, Biden kind of, whether he wanted to or not, kind of did rubber stamp a lot of these things, like I said, about like protecting American manufacturing, kind of like signaling to Europe, like, hey, maybe our relationship isn't as solid as you think. And that does seem to have given a kind of like stamp of legitimacy by the bourgeoisie, or at least certain large segments of it, to Trump's project. And yeah, it doesn't seem to be a good project, I say, as I just moved to Europe proper. I'm like, oh, great.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it, that there is, well, what you say about some of there being a continuity. I guess there's always a continuity between different governments, right? And like some governments do something, and then it takes the next one to legitimize it in some way. There is a continuity from the first Trump term into Biden, and I think it was the sort of Critisticuffs piece that drew it out, in offering a broader context for what 21st century imperialism looks like, what the history of imperialism has been over the last 100 years, and what its relationship to capital growth, the competition between capitalist nations has been. I guess there's a distinction between like broad class interest and then also what is politically feasible in some ways. So like recognizing that there is a certain continuity that runs through, or a certain awareness that has run through lots of the, or basically all of the presidential regimes in the United States in the 21st century, an awareness that global relations are changing, an awareness that the US's grip on global hegemony in terms of like international power and an ability to set the conditions for global trade and what the norms of international relations are going to be. Like America's been on the wane for at least since 2008, I suppose, but like, I don't know, let's say for the last 20, 30 years, ever since the end of this Cold War, perhaps. There's a certain, maybe we've now reached a point where all of that thinking has sort of coalesced into creating the conditions for somebody to act on those in a sort of more coherent way, or in a more deliberately directed way, I suppose. But yeah, that sort of, that distinction between like a sort of, even a contradiction perhaps between like clear economic interest and political feasibility, and how those two things sort of like run together and run in contradiction. Something, I don't know, speculating wildly, but like has an sort of like interesting ring to it, I guess.
There's something there.
I don't know.
There's something there. I think the thing that's so surprising to me too is like just how quickly things seem to be moving. Like I know, there's like the nothing ever happens meme, and it feels like no matter who's in office, no matter what goes on, it's all just kind of the same shit, different day. But, in that first Critisticuffs piece, they talk about how they kind of open it with a quote about Trump about like, how America should consider itself a growing nation again, and it's not going to be content with, its like current imperialist borders, and it's not going to be content with having military bases in basically like every country on the planet. It's like, no, we actually want to own Greenland. We want to own the Panama Canal. Apparently, we want to own Canada, right? And it's just funny because it's like
own in the double meaning of the word.
Pwn them. That's what we want to do. But it's funny, right? Because it's like, you can draw pretty distinct borders about like in history. I mean, about like there's the post World War II American led global order, which was obviously in like more or less direct indirect conflict with the kind of Soviet system, right? And obviously Soviet Union only fell in like the early 90s, and so now it's like, well, that kind of the kind of global American led order that Critisticuffs is really like grappling with, and that Trump is supposedly like tearing up, right? Well, not supposedly, like Trump is kind of trying to rework and tear up a little bit, like very new, very very new, if we only really consider it as actually beginning with America being the sole hegemon in the world in like the early 90s. And it's like a lot of these changes, like how Trump has just seemingly overnight managed to get on the campaign trail like the biggest businesses in American tech on his side. Like that is such a startling like quick change. And I don't know, it's just like it reminds me of the Lenin quote where it's like, there are months where weeks happen or whatever. There are years where weeks happen, and then there's like a week where a year happens, where it's like, I'm not saying these are like inherently revolutionary times or anything like that. It just seems like in a perhaps like low growth to zero growth environment for global capital accumulation, it's just like trying everything. And, like the last sector of American, economic power that was seeing growth kind of maybe up until recently, which is like the tech sector, it's just like, oh fuck, we need to completely abandon the like multicultural liberalism of the Democratic Party, which has been its mainstay forever, and just like drop the Californian ideology and just all of a sudden get on board with like something that wishes it was fascism. You know what I mean? It's just like, it's very stunning the ways in which how quickly these changes are happening, because it's like, man, I know that Trump was kind of like bullshitting in his first term about like, invading this place or invading that place. But to just now really like openly see, like, I think this weekend, like JD Vance is JD Vance of all people is supposed to go to Greenland to kind of like suss it out. It's like, that's wild. You know what I mean? I mean, I don't know what he's going to be doing over there. I don't know if anyone's going to take him particularly seriously. I would be so embarrassed if it's like, man, if I'm going to get invaded, at least send somebody with like more than 2 brain cells. But yeah, I don't know. Things seem to be moving quickly in a way that I think, just my point is that it's like very clear that it's moving so quickly because capital is kind of running out of options, if that makes sense. Not to say that we're not going to see a long, slow decline, which is, I think, obviously the most likely outcome. I don't think we're going to see like outright just societal collapse anytime soon. But, you know, things are moving quick. Things are moving quick.
Yeah, it's really interesting to introduce the idea of us to recognize that we're in conditions of capitalist crisis. Like, if we do, like, clearly, all all the leading capitalist economies are struggling, even China, relative to like economic growth of 20 or 30 years ago. What was interesting in the Critisticuffs piece, like, I really appreciated that sort of like introduction 101 of imperialism and how it relates to the history of capitalism and how it sort of like interlinks with the fortunes of capitalist, sort of national capitalist economies. One of the things that made me think about quite a bit was like things that Mike McNair says in Revolutionary Strategy about like identifying nation states as being sort of capitalist nation states as being responsible for managing the sort of like almost like the affairs of their country as if they are a capitalist enterprise that has particular interests and is in competition and what have you. And I don't know whether when I read that book, I sort of fully understood the picture of the relations between capitalist nations that he was trying to present. I feel like this Critisticuffs piece and the piece by Jack Conrad perhaps as well, like, have clarified some of that for me. What was interesting though in the Critisticuffs piece, when they're sort of sketching the idea of sort of like classical imperialism, like the first phase of imperialism from the like late 19th century all the way up until the beginning of World War One, I suppose, and perhaps including the interwar period as well. They present it as capitalist nations doing so well that they've sort of outgrown their capacity for their national markets to supply sufficient returns. And so they need to expand militarily and sort of actually conquer new spaces, conquer new markets to sell to, I suppose. So what I'm saying, what is, and maybe like tell me if you think I've come away with the wrong interpretation, but what I understood them to be saying was that first phase of imperialism was the result of the success and the growth of the first like wave of economically international capitalist nations, and the sort of like world order that was introduced after World War II, which had the US as sort of like at least a hegemon in the Western hemisphere, I guess, instituting a system whereby the same economic interests were at play, right? But it's a different way of facilitating the same outcome. So rather than um, having countries hold colonial holdings to provide them with sort of like market inputs and outputs which allow for their continued capitalist expansion, what they did was encourage the old imperial powers to free their colonies, give them nominal independence, but like create a regime of free trade so that capitalist markets can be expanded in a way which benefits the core capitalist nations, primarily the United States, um, with the same outcome. And I suppose what's being presented here is as a condition of the sort of like present crisis in capitalism with well, what's being presented in these pieces is new powers coming onto the global scene, which are challenging the United States for economic control, economic hegemony, entering into, the quote unquote multipolar world, I suppose. But also, I guess, there's a sense of like, okay, conditions of capitalist crisis. Is there an interest now to move away from the free trade global economy and like carve the world up again with liberal and willing use of military power if you as a nation state have access to it? Is that a symptom of capitalist crisis? I don't know, but it's a
Yeah, or
question.
just a capitalist crisis, or just, like when we read the Brenner stuff and it talks about how it's like it's not even a low growth environment, it's a zero growth environment. So you don't talk about, you know, upping your when you're I guess when you're talking on like a state level, you're not necessarily talking about promoting the interest of your national bourgeoisie so that they can grow more. It's more so just like you're trying to take a piece of somebody else's pie. Um, it was interesting. Yeah, I really enjoyed that stuff in that article about like the different phases of imperialism, and I think that the idea that America was actually kind of in favor after World War II of kind of like releasing direct control of these colonies is really interesting. And I mean, it's totally self-serving for America, right? It's not like America was doing this because it thought it was in the best interest of Europe, and it certainly didn't think it was in the best interest of all the former colonies, right? Um, but I thought that was very, very interesting. And yeah, I mean, I suppose just to say, like, when we kind of combine this with that Brenner stuff, it does seem to be like a sort of logical outcome for this phase of American-led imperialism, where it's like, China is seen, as you say, like it's seen its growth numbers shrink pretty dramatically. America is obviously kind of like trying to some extent, trying to onshore a lot of its manufacturing again. I suppose it does kind of in a teleological way, or maybe not even in a teleological way. Like we are just kind of describing what we're seeing. Like it does make sense that America would try now to like militarily compete with these different entities again, and kind of like I said, kind of try and sow discord in a lot of its competitors, mainly the EU. And also obviously China, and kind of like trying to do that through a kind of weird pseudo alliance with the third great power that America seems to see, which is Russia, in kind of like a very self-serving way. Just as a side note, it's so funny the way that like the like liberal press kind of describes a lot of this stuff, because it's like surely there are no laws of capitalism making the leader of the American empire want to like get in bed with like Vladimir Putin. It's that there was a piss tape. It's so funny. It's just like yes,
Are
the
people still
way
talking
things
about
operate.
that?
No, unfortunately,
No,
but I
no,
think
no,
about that too
no.
much. I think about that a lot. It's
Yeah,
like
yeah, yeah.
release the tape. Release
Yes.
the tape. Yeah. Um, and then also just like the way, just to kind of go like right back to the beginning of that article, the way in which Critisticuffs kind of describes their theory of the state, I thought was really, really good. And it made me think that there's like this really interesting, I'm not going to say dialectical, but I could say dialectical relationship between the state and its national bourgeoisie, right? Where it's like, obviously the state promotes its domestic bourgeoisie so that it can also promote them abroad, so that so that the bourgeoisie can grow, and that it can also fund the state to grow its power, and that when the economic imperialism takes place propped up by the state, then that actually promotes the state's growth. And there's this really interesting kind of one scratches the other's back, the other scratches the other, where it's like obvious, this is kind of Marxism 101, it's kind of obvious, but it's like imperialism, economic and just otherwise, is a way of both of these institutions acting in their own best interests in a way that is very like mutually um what's the word, good, I guess, for both of them. And I mean, all you got to do is just see like when any politician leaves their job as Secretary of State, or as like, I don't know, some kind of imperialist like horrible person. They just get a job at McKinsey. They just get some consultant job, and it's just like obviously a revolving door. That's the way that it operates, and concretely. But it's very interesting seeing the ways that these two things feed off of each other. And I think that any theory of the state and imperialism kind of needs to maybe take that into account, the ways in which it's not just the state propping up the bourgeoisie, it's the bourgeoisie are also propping up the state, and that when both of them are growing, the other one will grow, if that makes sense. And when one's growing, the other one will grow, and it makes sense for both of them to kind of operate like that.
I guess that then offers as a way to like look at the sudden shift in support of the sort of like Californian tech oligarchs towards supporting Trump, whether they've recognized some other particular set of threats to their interest, like an inability to produce the hardware for their technology in China, or an inability to enforce global uptake of their particular piece of um, social media software, or their distributive or internet software in some ways. Try not to use brand names for some reason,
Yeah.
as if like I'm not allowed to say Amazon or like AWS.
Yeah. And it is also interesting, like domestically too, where it's like, during the Obama years, you saw a big uptick in kind of nonprofit, state-funded nonprofits like Women in STEM, or kind of like inner city kids teaching them how to code, presumably because was like a massive boom time for tech companies, and they needed a wider pool of labor, kind of like trained labor. That's kind of expensive to train people to like learn how to code, I guess. I know nothing about coding. I would imagine you have to train people for a while to learn how to do it. And also just like the establishment of basically importing immigrants to work for these tech companies on pretty like obviously like unfavorable terms for those workers, where it's basically like this giant tech company will hire you and you can move to America, but they control your immigration status and they control where you live and they control all of these different things, right? Whereas now, presumably because we're seeing another slow segment of growth for tech companies, now they just need to kind of fire people and they need to discipline labor again. And so, this is where we kind of can, I guess, talk a little bit about ideology too, where it's like the kind of racist, stupid bullshit that the Trump administration spouts obviously has its basis in disciplining labor, and it has its basis in capitalism and everything. But for these tech companies to all of a sudden start being like, I don't know about all of these visas that we're giving to brown people, I don't know about this whole wokeism diversity thing, it's like you just kind of have to see that as just an ideological cover for them just needing to fire loads of people and discipline labor again, right? And it's the same thing with Trump's deportation programs, with wanting to discipline labor, and you get the ideology after that. This is like the one thing that liberals just really don't understand. It's like this is where they are very much stuck in the Trump's an idiot and he's just a bad racist. He is an idiot and he is a bad racist and he's one of the worst people on the planet, but it's like, there's a reason that this ideology sprouts. It's like Republicans have been doing this shit forever, and there's a reason for it, right? It just so happens that the reason now is this kind of jumping of ship that we're seeing with certain segments of the bourgeoisie needing to discipline labor. It's the only reason anything happens in capitalism, to discipline labor.
Yeah, I appreciate that clarity that you offer there, because I often get a bit confused between like the envisaging the raw political or economic interest and the sort of like the political ideological dressing that it comes with. One of the things that I was testing in my head was whether I fully agreed with the idea that like it's hard for me to imagine Trump as a kind of like uh, religious nationalist, who wants to institute
Yeah.
some kind of theocratic government, and that
The like billionaire from
there's a piece
Queens.
in this where he's cast in such a light kind of thing. The assertion being that there is a fear for like the US's declining birth rate and an inability to reproduce the workforce and that kind of thing, and like
I think
yeah,
I know where you're going with that.
I don't
This
know.
was a bit like, yeah. Well, I think we've kind of had a similar conversation like this on the show before, where it's like, whenever you get a purely Marxist reading of like family dynamics, you know what I mean? It's a little bit like, I don't know, how true could that be? Or like, I almost like we're giving them too much credit. It's like, so like, yeah, the ideological cover for a lot of the like anti-queer, misogynist shit, traditional family values that you see Republicans spouting, like the ideological cover for that is, I guess, just traditional values and religion of some sort, I guess, like evangelical shit and trad caths that they mention in here. But then the argument that's being made, which we've kind of come across before, is that this is kind of like what you're saying, like a way to kind of control declining birth rates and declining uh, uh what's the word, like uh I just
Demographic
demographic
decline.
decline.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. In a way that is like, are they real? Like, is that really? Could that really be the case? That's really why they're telling, like young men that they need to have the like good white family with picket fence and 5 kids. It's like, is it? when it gets a little unbelievable for me is when it's like all of the anti-trans stuff. It's like maybe they're just bigots. Maybe they just don't like change. Maybe it's just a scapegoat. Maybe it's not like they're scared of people breaking the gender binary. You know what I mean?
I mean, yeah, a good number of the politicians are definitely bigots, and then I guess maybe it's just like simple. Like I think we talked about this a bit with the Brenner piece. Is like you're still like trying to amass political coalitions, you know, and it's just like
Yeah.
And it's the sowing division part of the equation as well, I guess. But like sometimes, yeah, it's how to balance sort of like a pure economic determinism with a recognition of like politics having a leading edge in some of what happens as well, and I guess how those two interact.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, if it weren't so grim, it would just be funny to imagine. It's just like, oh, that you don't need a Marxist reading of that. These are just like your angry like grandparents and uncles, but they're just in government and they're just like trans. I don't understand that. You know what I mean? It's like, maybe that's it. Like maybe it is just as simple as they are just bigots. All right, so maybe we talk a little bit about the there is that other essay that we read in Edith by Edith Fischer. It was called The American Sulla, which I love a good Roman Empire reference. So I saw this and I was like,
yeah, I was thinking about asking you to explain that reference to me.
I don't know.
Jack will know.
Maybe I'm just on
my
board.
Friend who thinks daily about the Roman Empire.
Oh no. Listen, when I was commuting for like 5 years and I had like a 40-mile commute each way, all I listened to was just re-listen of God damn it, what's his name? Mike Duncan. Yes, Mike Duncan's History of Rome podcast. So I could tell you a little bit about Sulla, but I'm not going to bore everybody with that now. Just basically a fetish for like, you know, like people who 300 is their favorite movie. He's like their chosen like conservative counter-revolutionary reactionary guy. But yeah, I was thinking maybe we talk a little bit like the name of that was chosen because the author's like Reagan was kind of like this reactionary, counter-revolutionary guy who was going to lead America through the like period of stagflation where American capitalism seemed like, is this global order actually going to work? It seems like things are actually kind of in a bit of a crisis. And obviously, you know, we know like the way that they got through that was through like the advent of neoliberalism and just like gutting public sectors and just utterly like crushing any kind of organized labor in the United States. And the author says that Reagan was the Sulla for the epoch of generalized free trade, whereas Trump is the Sulla for the epoch of direct inter-imperialist conflict, which is a really worrying thought. But maybe before we get into like the inter-imperialist stuff, it's kind of would be interesting to talk about like the ways in which domestic industry under Reagan kind of like relates to domestic industry now. Because as they say in the Critisticuffs piece, like all Trump is doing is the same thing that every other leader of the American empire has always wanted to do, which is just maintain American hegemony. He's just doing it in a different way, right? And it's interesting because like when you think about Reagan, the kind of first thing I think about, other than him just like massively crushing unions, is like massive disinvestment in the like domestic industrial base of the United States. And I kind of want to know what you think about this because there's a lot of like hay being made about like Trump trying to restart, kind of like re-onshore different industries and kind of like get American manufacturing back going. Whether that's because COVID-19 saw everybody just be like, oh fuck, like global supply chains are not actually particularly solid, or just because it's some kind of, you know, imperialist project to kind of like try and steal a piece of the pie from other people. But like, I don't know. I'm kind of wondering like how possible that is. I mean, and I guess it doesn't matter. Like capitalists are going to try what they're going to try. And if this is their only option, they're going to try that. But like, I don't know. How possible is it to like bring back American manufacturing and like have it at a level where labor is like remotely as cheap as it would be elsewhere? Like it seems like it's doomed to fail, which it probably is.
I guess there's a few things to ask, right? Like what would be Trump's objective? Like, is there just a sense that the ability to manufacture consumer goods, electronic goods, whatever else, in other parts of the world, in China, in other areas of Southeast Asia, is just either doesn't afford them the necessary degree of control or hegemony or profitability, and the sort of a general desire to be able to sort of capture all of that productivity and bring it back within sort of like the literal borders of the United States, rather than sort of a metaphorical global reach that they would have had in the kind of like post World War II era. And then there's maybe like a fictitious wish to be able to recreate the like reinvigorate the US jobs market, I guess, like placate the demands of Trumpian voters by, you know, bringing back industry and bringing back coal mining and whatever else. And obviously the conditions for that don't exist anymore, right? Like the should these jobs be be brought back to the United States, then obviously they will bring with them all of the automation that's gone on in all of these sectors. And would they actually facilitate sufficiently large job growth? I mean, like, it's not particularly likely. And that comes then along with a generalized impoverishment of the US population. Like, if the desire is to be able to have a consumer base that sort of like sits at that facilitates this sort of power of your economy, like, I don't know how they intend to restore. I mean, I maybe that's too. Maybe I'm ill-informed about the sort of like generalized health of um, the US, the general US population's ability to consume, whether it's being like as impoverished as the UK population seems to be generally. Um, yeah,
Yeah. I mean, if the goal is to impoverish
and
people, like, yeah,
I
it's
mean, I
doing
get
well.
sorry. The other thing that I wanted to say was like, if you are going to bring those things, as you implied, like, if you bring back those jobs, they're going to have to be paid at something comparable to the wages that are paid in those parts of the world where these jobs were offshored too. And so maybe there is um, a maybe that does go hand in hand with a generalized desire to further impoverish the populations of Western, formerly sort of core imperialist countries.
Yeah, new type of guy, the guy that wants to see Trump's economic reshoring succeeds, so that we can get a new industrial proletariat back in America and have a new basis for revolution.
Yeah,
um,
yeah,
it's
yeah.
it is interesting though, because like if you look at the ways in which like Elon Musk's, I can't believe we have to actually talk about him, but like his American manufacturing base has operated, it's just purely through graft. Like the only reason any of those fucking companies are profitable is because the state just guarantees their debts. You know what I mean? And just outright funds all of their R&D and lets a few people like, you know, collect their paychecks and collect all of the profit. And like now obviously the state and those things are literally one and the same, because Musk has some quote unquote like made up job, which is having very real consequences for people. But like, I don't know. I don't want to make too much of that, because it's like I don't want to be it's not quite general cartel stuff. But I guess like I don't know, people that work at Tesla and manufacturing hubs, like they have shitty jobs. You know what I mean? It's not like those are like good American
Mhm.
manufacturing jobs. It's not like if you, I don't know, does SpaceX have like manufacturing? Probably they have like manufacturing things. I doubt those jobs are particularly good anyways. So it's like maybe what they're trying to do, whether or not this will succeed in any way, is a like, you know, crash the economy, a lot of tariffs, make inflation drive everything up, impoverish all of the working people so that you can try and bring back some of these jobs, and then just have the state guarantee everything. And it's like kind of a like fake. I mean, now I just sound like one of those neo feudalist people, but it's like, you know, I am just describing what I'm seeing, hopefully to a certain extent. But yeah, whatever's going on, it's very stupid. It's very, very stupid. Um, Maybe we can talk a little bit too about like how some of these essays touched upon how a massive part of the Republican Party is now, and always kind of has been for like the last few Republican administrations, has been like extractive capital. We talked about this a little bit when we read Hinterland, the Phil Neal book, but this is like capitalists were seeing, their profits eaten into by big government because they're telling them not to cut down all the forests, and they're telling them I can't mine my small holding gold claim on BLM land, and like, ranchers and farmers and agricultural morons and like people who just want to like drain all of the water from California so we can grow an absurd amount of almonds, right? Like this is the part, other than the like threat of inter-imperial war, other than that, this is the part that is like so scary, because it's like if there ever was a time for like extractive capitalists, small and otherwise, to not have an outweighed seat at the table, it would be right now. You know what I mean? It's like the thought of this kind of like economic program is scary for how poor it's going to make people. The thought of like, hey, maybe war is back on the table is scary for obvious reasons, but it's like, oh my God, really? We're just going to like, really? We're going to use all of the oil? Are we really going to try and bring coal back? Are we really going to just cut down all of the forests? It's just like, I don't know why I would expect anything else, but brutal.
Well, I mean, it's a general, like, it's a symptom of generalized crisis, I suppose, that we're like there is a desire or a willingness to get rid of those things, that those regulations within the state that like protect generally the population from the excesses of the worst extremes of sort of corporate extractionism and cost cutting, and like a willingness to just extract to the fullest, and dump chemicals in the rivers and whatever else, like.
Yeah, I mean, again, it's a reminder too that it's like the first goal of the state is never to like be an arbiter between capital and labor. It has to be that the first goal of the state is always to just reproduce the given social relations, right? So it's like, yeah, it's no surprise that it's like the given social relations need to be stitched up by another influx of what our good friend Jason W. Moore would just call free gifts, right? It's like, you know, cheap money, cheap oil, cheap fuels, cheap inputs, I guess is just another way to say it. Cheap circulating capital. And at a time when we don't want that.
Yes, once again, we end up at the point where
we don't
capitalism is going to destroy life on this planet.
Yeah, once again, we find ourselves in this situation. What did you make of the last two paragraphs of the Critisticuffs piece? I was interested to ask you about
which were the last two paragraphs.
It was basically
like what should be done politically kind of
yeah,
thing.
Yeah,
I feel like so many these essays ended with like a what should be done politically. I don't know. I just remember that. Well, what I read was the end of their one where they're like, what we need is the general strike, and then I immediately started the Jack Conrad one, and he was like, just all these idiots want the general strike to be the solution. Actually, we need to rebuild the party.
I know. I love how every single Weekly Worker article, like without fail, is like, anyways, the mass party.
Yeah. That's why you don't have to ask me about the last two paragraphs of the Jack Conrad because they're all the same, right? Like,
he's just like fucking
actually
idiot
rebuild the working class, build the mass party, Marxist regroupment, stupid sects.
Yada yada. Here we go. Well, the reason I asked you
tell me what happens.
Well, I mean, it's just like classic kind of like leftcom stuff, which listeners to the show, you guys know. We're partial to a good bit of leftcom
now and again, a little sprinkling.
But I think in this one it was basically just to like, an implication that it's like it doesn't particularly matter where you live, under what rule of what bourgeoisie. It's all capitalism, man. It all needs to be fought against, which obviously that last bit is true.
Mm-hmm.
But it's also like, man, it does matter. Like, it so obviously matters where you live. And like, to kind of flatten all inter-imperialist conflicts to just like to what they are, which is, inter-imperialist conflicts between different factions of the bourgeoisie that the working class has absolutely no stake in. It's like, yeah, but also like there are differences between some wars. I'm not defending any of them, but it's like, differences between where you live, differences between, I don't know, some of these territorial disputes, I suppose.
And I think it's like it's always easier. I wouldn't be surprised if it's the case that it's always easier for people to resort back to. I don't mean like political leaders. I mean your everyday person to resort back to some degree of nationalism, some degree of not necessarily xenophobia, right? But like my country first, the people that I know first, our economy first, and to have just a blanket. Not that I disagree, right? That in the long run, um, under objective scientific conditions, like our interests are the same, whether we're a proletarian in what country or the other country, or like um, on an abstract level, but on a concrete level, do we share interests um, when it really comes down to it? And I don't say that to be super fatalistic, but simply to say, well, do we need a better answer, or do we need a different description of the circumstances? No, it's a short essay. Like, have the rousing end. I don't disagree with it. I don't like condemn it, but like, I don't know.
Yeah. I think if Jack Conrad had his way and there was the mass party, then we might need to have a line on some of these territorial disputes. As
Mhm.
it stands,
I
man,
mean, yeah,
like
that's yeah. Yeah, exactly. We don't need to have a line because there isn't like there is no mass to align with the line. But like,
ugh.
but like there is a certain. I mean, there are things in the Jack Conrad piece like that are worth mentioning. I suppose like it it's brought home to me the real possibility of like new 21st century inter-imperialist conflicts, but also what's nice about that piece is a degree of openness to what is to come. He's not particularly like this is definitely what's going to happen, and this will lead to this, and this will lead to the other thing. But like more, there's a portion of that, but there's a portion of sort of like recognition of the unknown, and to some extent recognition of the unknown whilst making the direct comparison to the run up to World War One, right? And like we just don't know what series of events are going to bring what powers into alliance with whom. Like, is the US going to successfully make an alliance with Russia and bring it into the global world order, reestablish the G8, make it a third pole with China and the US of being a serious imperial in power, or like is Russia going to ally with China because their interests are actually in sort of building a trade bloc in the sort of like on the Eurasian continent, I guess, um, and just a recognition to an openness to all of those particular possible outcomes. But there's something that is in, I think, almost in all of these pieces, particularly in the last two that were both published in the Weekly Worker, is this sort of lamenting that whilst we exist under the similar conditions which led up to the outbreak of World War One, there is no comparable mass working class party. Um, I don't know. There was a part of me that was thinking through this. Well, maybe we don't actually exist under those conditions. Maybe what we exist under is the conditions of the 19th century, where the proletariat is just going to be thoroughly abused by the most sort of voracious desires of the capitalist class to expand its wealth and power as much as possible. And like, it's under those conditions of impoverishment that like some new political formation needs to be built. There's a degree to which that's like and a sort of I'm sort of proposing an immiseration theory. I don't know whether I stand with that, but like um, suggesting that we exist under those conditions vis-a-vis the run up to World War One without a mass working class party. I don't know how confident I am in that assessment, I guess.
Yeah, I think one thing that you raised that's a really really important point, and that is really interesting, is like so much breath is kind of wasted about talking about whether or not MAGAism and Trumpism is fascist, because it's like, on one hand, sure, like yes, like it's very evil, you know what I mean? But on the other hand, it's like, man, it doesn't need to be fascist. You know what I'm saying? It's like, it doesn't
Because there's
really
new
need
types
any
of
of this
evil under
shit.
the sun.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, it's like, if anything, like the whole January 6th farce showed that, like, actually Trump kind of doesn't need paramilitary groups, like farcical things like the Proud Boys or whatever the fuck. Like, kind of just doesn't need that.
Partly because there is no organized proletarian force
Exactly, to
to
whack down.
suppress, you know.
Yeah, there's no Alabama communes like in Bavaria where it's like, they had to go down there and send the Freikorps in. The fucking Social Democrats sent the Freikorps in. It's like, it doesn't need to be fascist. It doesn't need to, like, it's like Trump controls, like, that administration controls so much of the government without needing to kind of be fascist, that it's just like, the only thing really standing in its way is the interests of certain segments of the national bourgeoisie in the United States, and then obviously, like, Europe or something like that, right? But yeah, it's interesting. It's like the lack of any kind of like radical organized working class movement adds a completely, I feel like, well, kind of up until what you just said, like, for me at least, like a completely unknown dimension to all of this, where it's just like, maybe capitalism is just going to eat itself alive. Like, I mean, until there is kind of that point where there is an immiseration crisis, right? But
capitalism in decline, but otherwise unfettered. Like,
yeah,
what will
exactly.
it do?
Yeah. I don't particularly want to know, but yeah. And then I guess the only other thing is just kind of along those lines is like the kind of, I don't know, when you kind of mention the immiseration stuff, it's like, and everybody kind of always and myself as well, always wants to like distance themselves from any kind of like pure immiseration thesis of like, that can be confused for accelerationism, because those are like gross politics that don't belong in the left. But it's like, it's one thing to do that. It's another thing to just completely describe what is happening. You know what I mean? And the development of history up into this point. And it certainly seems like, you know, I don't know if it can go on for a whole lot longer where there isn't a kind of like militant working class movement in the like United States, because, you already can't survive if you're a gig worker. You know what I mean? And you already can't survive if you have a full-time job. That's why there are gig workers, right? It's like something is going to have to give. But again, people aren't necessarily talking about revolution. They're talking about, like, I don't know, pain pills and how to survive on no money. You know what I mean? So maybe I'm wrong. Let's hope I'm not.
I mean, there's part of me that thinks that something still lingering in people's consciousness is something that was developed in the 20th century, which is a sort of like expectation of things getting better, and an expectation that what politics is meant to be moving us toward is a condition where people have more, and like people have access to the services that they need. My suspicion is that most people actually want to bring about those conditions. They've no idea how to do it, and nobody's trying to offer it to them. But under conditions where that promise seems to be slipping away, I mean, I don't know what political advantages that allows us, but I think there are some.
Yeah. Yeah. And it will be interesting to see how long the Republican Party can kind of hold on to its working class base.
Well, it seems to be, much hay seems to be being made of like how certain sections of MAGA are turning against some of what Trump's been doing.
Yeah, I will believe that people will stop voting for the Republicans when people stop voting for the Republicans, because it's like, man, I've been hearing that my whole life.
I mean, what else are they going to do as well?
Yeah, I mean,
vote for the Democrats.
Yeah, exactly. There's another interesting point that we should probably touch on, which is just like, where does all of this leave the Democrats? Because it's like, has that kind of college educated, progressive, multicultural neoliberalism of Obama, Biden, rest in peace, Kamala Harris, like, has all of that kind of just failed? And can they build another coalition, or rebuild that coalition to an extent that it can kind of ever particularly challenge Trumpism, at least at the present, like the executive level? It'll be interesting to see, because I don't know, this last election, it would be, I don't know, it would be surprising to me if Well, I don't like making predictions, but it seems like it's certainly, for the moment, kind of dead in the water for maybe just the reason that people are just like, well, that shit failed. You know what I mean? And it's like, what are we going to do? Vote for them again? They'll probably not vote, and we'll probably get a lot of young professionals becoming reactionaries, you know? Mm. Reactionary young professionals, educated college professionals going over to MAGism, and then maybe like racists, like, you know, working class people going to the Democrats. Jesus. Who knows, man?
The great voter realignment when nothing changes.
Where nothing changes. Yeah, exactly. Talk about a zero-sum game.
I mean, we just just the margins for victory become slimmer and slimmer, and everybody's, you know, they're fighting over a smaller and smaller segment of like potentially persuadable voters, as is a symptom of, like, you know, crisis-ridden capitalist politics, perhaps.
Whoa. It's great. Good time to be unemployed, man. What do you think we get first? Do you think we get a attempt at a commune, or do you think we get a
aliens?
Aliens? Yeah. We keep saying we're gonna read that fucking book, Posada's book. Maybe that's the answer, Dan.
Sorry, no.
No, or like something resembling a social democratic attempt at mass politics.
I mean, God, like surely, like, it's not that I agree with it necessarily, but like, surely some sensible, like, establishment figure is going to try and save capitalism from a social democratic perspective. Like, I don't know, you know. I mean, maybe it's I mean, obviously it's like, so we've read before, you know, maybe social democracy is made unviable by like
no growth.
Like a no growth economy, whatever, you know. But like,
surely,
you know, sure. Surely somebody's just got to try and take some of this money off these rich people, you know?
Yeah, but I mean, forget about the no growth stuff. It's like, are the parameters for political action in the United States just so slim that the most we're ever going to get in those terms is like Bernie's America First, soft social democracy, Ben and Jerry's stuff? You know what I mean? Like, but sure.
Yeah, I mean, maybe that's what I mean when I say surely. Maybe it's like, you know. I'm not saying it's going to work. I'm not saying it's going to be good for people. You know, I'm just saying, like,
yeah. Then we'll get back into the arena of like talk about Roman empires. We'll get back to like the Gracchus brothers and like arena for political assassination. It's all going to go well. It's all going to go really, really well.
Yeah, with nukes.
Well, fuck. I've intentionally not brought up nukes.
Sorry.
I don't want to talk about nukes.
Right, cut it.
About nukes, man.
We're done.
This idea of Germany being like, "Hey, France, would you like to share some of your nuclear weapons?" It's like, oh my god.
We'll give you some Volkswagens.
Yeah, exactly. We'll give you some Fanta and some Hugo Boss. Oh dear. Yeah. Didn't really bring up Germany. Germany gets some good treatment in the Critisticuffs piece, just as like a really interesting case study of an economy that was allowed, a national bourgeoisie that was allowed to grow post World War II under the guarantees that America gave Europe and Western Germany, I suppose, for like security. So it's like, what an interesting like blip in capitalist kind of like imperialism, where it's like Germany's been able to kind of regrow this massive economy with no military. It's like,
you can have economic growth so long as you accept being the first place to be nuked when the time's rolling, you know.
Exactly.
Should this whole Cold War become hot, you know?
Yeah.
It worked out for a little while.
Worked out for a while, and now the conservatives are back in power in Germany, and they're like, "What about a bigger army? Cool, things are going well."
A crazy thought that jumped into my mind when I was reading some of this was like thinking back to like the scenarios for the future presented in like Command and Conquer games, where Europe is some kind of substantial faction that's like at war with other parts of the world. Like, oh, maybe it wasn't so far off the mark.
Yeah, exactly.
Obviously, like, the maybe there is going to be no European army, but like,
and if the UK will be part of that, I have major
yeah,
questions.
well, yeah.
So.
Yeah.
Fuck, where does that leave Ireland?
Gonna,
oh my god!
Is there going to UK going to go to war with Denmark over allowing the US to march into Greenland or whatever?
That does sound really, really like just the most English thing that could happen. It's like the UK brings back its patriotic roots by invading like Denmark. There was a bit in the Critisticuffs piece where they linked to an article in the Telegraph by some knuckle-dragging op-ed writer, and he was like, perhaps the UK has the first right of ownership over Greenland. And it's like, who pays these people to write this shit? It's just like...
Yeah. There's a new scramble for maybe what's happening actually. It's like a scramble for those bits of those latitudes that are going to become habitable as the
exactly
planet warms.
How much oil is beneath all of the glaciers in Greenland?
We're melting.
God damn it!
So Mr. Burns.
Oh my god. I think next time we read any kind of ecological thing, I'm just going to be like, this isn't doomy enough. Like, God damn.
Far too optimistic.
Far too optimistic. Although, as Jason W. Moore would say, fertile ground for organizing everybody. Disaster, I suppose. What are you going to do? I was talking about that recently, about like to what extent that's accelerationism. And it's like, it isn't. But it's not. But it's also like, again, it's the difference between kind of like trying to predict accelerationism and just describing capitalist development up until now. It's like things are bad and they're getting worse.
Well, yeah, I mean, accelerationism is just like doing nothing because what we want to have happen is already happening.
Yeah.
The revolution is assured at the end of that process, whereas like...
Yeah, man.
Hey. Great. Well, I don't know whether I'm optimistic now or not. Did I say I was optimistic when we was? I'm not optimistic.
I don't think you did.
It's like not optimistic. I have a degree of clarity after reading these that I didn't have before, and therefore
wanted or not
positive.
Yeah. It's funny, every now and then you'll hear Marxists be like, they'll like talk about the direction some like things are going, and it'll be like, yeah, but it would really suck to be in Europe, or it would really suck to be in the UK, and then like, European Marxists would be like, but it would really, like, things are bad in America. And it's just like, man, things are bad. Like, we can just say that. I don't want to compete with people about who's going to be like the worst off. It's like, shit's bad, man. Shit's bad. What are you going to do? Well,
unite the global proletariat against our class oppressors.
Exactly, Dan.
Etc. Recognize our common international interest.
Yeah, I'll be the broad bean supplier for the International Proletarian Army. All right, Dan, cool. Let's read something like about the past next time.
Yes, yeah. As far back as possible, please.
Yeah. About much happier times. All right. Well, thank you very much, Dan. I enjoyed our bi-yearly current events podcast with you.
See where we are in 6 months' time, I guess.
Hey, everybody. Jack here. Thank you so much for listening to this week's episode. The song that you heard on this episode is Music to Kill Bad People To by King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard. You can go ahead and check this song out much more on their Bandcamp at kinggizzard.bandcamp.com. If you want to go ahead and get in touch with us, chat shit, tell us that we're wrong, whatever you want to do, you can go ahead and do that at auxiliarystatements@gmail.com. You can just send us a message there. Or you can get in touch with us on Twitter, on Discord, on Instagram. You're a smart person. You can find these places. We got a YouTube. We post stuff there as well. Sometimes we stream. Thank you so much for listening. Till next time.